Support.
The maestro, please.
First pop analysis of 2023, and we're starting off with an artist we have yet to talk about. Today's pop analysis is on Miley Cyrus's Flowers.
Miley Cyrus.
American music icon Miley Cyrus, originally rising to fame portraying the Disney character Hannah Montana. Despite her being an icon, this is actually the first time we're talking about her, despite the fact that we've already talked about her father in that other pop analysis we did a while ago about a certain record-breaking song. She had a number of charting songs when she was performing as Hannah Montana. Given once she left Disney and was now just Miley Cyrus, she very much kept it up and in fact got her highest charting song shortly thereafter. That being said, if there's one song that Miley Cyrus was known for, well, that would probably be
I came in like a wrecking ball. I never
Background.
Flowers was originally released on January 12th of 2023. It charted later that month at number 1, and as of the beginning of February is still number 1. Flowers is going to be off of Miley Cyrus's upcoming album Endless Summer Vacation, which is slated to be released on March 10th of 2023. Flowers is the first single off of said album. In addition to Miley Cyrus, credits on Flowers include All Day, Michael Pollack, Kid Harpoon, and Tyler Johnson. Gregory All Day Hines, simply known by his middle name All Day, is quite the experienced pop songwriter, having credits such as
Take me as I am, swear I do the best I can say.
and
It's okay not to feel okay.
Michael Pollack should be somewhat familiar to those of you who've watched this show for a long time. We talked about him back when we did
And the memories bring back your... There's a time that I
Since then, he's gotten even more high-profile songwriting credits to his name, such as
feel so holy, 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 holy.
in addition to
I wish the heaven had visiting hours.
that leaves Kid Harpoon and Tyler Johnson, both of whom we talked about recently because they both worked on
You know it's not the same as it was.
And since that was so recent, we actually don't have any other pop credits to talk about besides this one. Flowers is released solely by Columbia.
Form.
Flowers is listed as a dance pop, new disco, and funk rock song, is a little bit over 3 minutes and 20 seconds, is in C major, and 118 beats per minute. After the intro, which is just the crackle and the guitar chord, we get the first verse,
We were good, we were gold.
which is then followed by the first pre-chorus,
I didn't wanna leave you, I didn't wanna lie.
and then the first chorus.
I can buy myself flowers.
We then get a post-chorus
Can you love me better? Can you love me better, baby?
before going to the second verse.
I forgive every word you say.
That then leads us to our second pre-chorus,
Started to cry, but then remembered I
second chorus,
say things you don't understand.
and a second post-chorus, but this one's longer than the first one.
Can you love me better? Can you love me better, baby? Can you love me?
We then get a short bridge, which is just reiterating the pre-chorus material,
I didn't wanna fight, started to cry, but
a third chorus,
I can take myself dancing. Yeah.
a third post-chorus,
Can you love me better, baby? Can you love me better?
before the song finally ends.
Can you love me better?
Keyboard.
The main harmonic figure that actually is quite buried until later on in the song when it changes patches. Regardless, it supports the main chord progression, simply going A minor, D minor over A, G major, and then C major over G. It pretty much repeats that, though the patch does change on the keyboard, but later we actually get an E major chord which fades out, and then we fade back in on these E dominant 7 chords. Later in the song it repeats those same chords, but they're now delayed by a beat. And And finally, the keyboard changes one more time, just doing these fade in, fade out quarter note chords.
Guitar.
The guitar often does not actually play any chords and has this very thick phaser-like effect on it, mostly just playing low single notes, but we do get occasional pairs. During the verses, it typically does not repeat any figure once. It's like it's just improvising the entire time. There are times when it plays less and times that it plays more, but for the most part, it's just kind of reinforcing any sort of harmonic figures being played by the keyboard. Later on in the song, especially in the post-chorus, the phaser-like effect is removed, and we just have the guitar playing that low A for the most part, doing 8th notes and 16th notes, but there are a couple of melodic figures that it sneaks in there. It can be quite difficult to hear because it's buried in the texture, but if you listen very carefully, you can hear it chugging along in the background. In the bridge, we'd once again have that phaser-like effect on it, and we actually have it playing a chord finally, that E dominant 7.
Bass.
The groovy bass line pretty much exists in this form throughout the entirety of the song, given there are slight alterations. But the main part is that it goes from A to D to G to C, but it has these passing figures in between each. The following phrase essentially has the bass repeat that exactly, minus the very ending phrase. We don't have that transitionary down figure, it's now just going back and forth between C and D at the end. As we transition into the next part of the song, though, it starts off the same, but starts holding on that D before finally going to that low E. Moving on to the chorus, it still is essentially repeating that same figure melodically, but rhythmically it's now different. Instead of doing that quarter note and the offbeat 8th note, it's now just 2 8th notes on the beat, minus the last figure, of course. It then goes on to just before, basically repeat that same figure with a slightly different ending. Transitioning out of the chorus, the bass changes the rhythm yet again, now doing an 8th note and a quarter note. You can hear that the second note is held out a bit longer, before on the back half of this phrase going from C, down to B, down to F, and finally ending on E. The only other unique bass figure we get is actually during the bridge. It starts off on that high A before dropping to D, and then it's silent for the rest of the bridge.
Synth.
The saw-like synth only ever does this one figure, but it does come back a number of times throughout the song. It's all 8th notes, simply doing Fs before moving down to Es.
Strings.
The highly syncopated string part, almost always doing offbeat quarter notes, starts off on that high E, then works up to F, working its way down to B before going back up to E, down to D, down to C, down to A, and then a second line is added underneath on that C. The upper line then drops to F, and then we end on this lovely G sharp and E harmony. After that, they then harmonically resolve to A and E, which they hold out for 4 bars. Later on in the song, the strings actually come in earlier. They now open up on this A before going down to F, up to D, down to B, down to G, back up to A, and then on G again. The following phrase starts off on that low E, goes up to A, goes down to F, goes up to D, goes down to B, and then a second line is added above it in octaves, going C, B, C, D, at which point the strings then repeat what we have talked about earlier.
Verse.
The verses have Miley quite low in her range. The highest note she hits is that C, and she constantly goes down to that A, except in the following sub-phrase when she goes all the way down to that E, with very syncopated rhythms, I might add.
We were good, we were gold, kind of dream that can't be sold.
The following phrase in the first verse essentially repeats that exactly, except for different words.
We were right till we weren't, built a home and watched it burn.
Same goes for the second verse that starts off exactly like the first verse, except, again, different words.
Paint my nails cherry red, match the roses that you laid.
We get a very little change in the second half of the second verse, but again, it's just because she's using a word with more syllables at the end.
No remorse, no regret, I forgive every word you say.
Pre-chorus.
In the pre-chorus, she goes a little bit higher, and her rhythms become a little bit more complex with the addition of sixteenths. Still, though, the highest note she hits during this entire time is that D below the staff.
I didn't wanna leave you, I didn't wanna lie. Started to cry, but then remembered
The second pre-chorus is essentially identical, again, except for different words, and because different words have different syllables, there's an additional note here and there. In fact, there's only one additional note. It's the U right before babe.
Ooh, I didn't wanna leave you, baby. I didn't wanna fight. Started to cry, but then remembered
Chorus.
Miley finally slowly making her way onto the staff, getting to that F at the very least. You'll notice the rhythms are simplified a little bit, not nearly as much syncopation as we had in the pre-chorus.
I can buy myself flowers, write my name in the sand.
The following phrase does essentially repeat that, but we do have a bit more interesting melodies with melismas, and we do have a bit more complicated rhythms, especially on the word understand, but still we're not getting higher than that F.
Talk to myself for hours, see things you don't understand.
Once we get to the second half of the chorus, we are now fully on the staff, at least for a good chunk of this part. We get all the way to that A, but again, the rhythms still are not terribly complex, especially when compared with the previous section.
I can take myself dancing, and I can hold my own head.
As we wrap up the chorus again, we're moving lower in our range, but we do get some of that syncopation back, but again, we're going all the way to that low A.
Yeah, I can love me better than you can.
The second chorus, for the most part, is identical, minus this line that has that additional yeah after the word hours.
Talk to myself for hours, yeah, say things you don't understand.
The big changes come, though, when we get to the final chorus, because we have an additional harmonic line above Miley's original line.
I can buy myself flowers, write my name in the sand.
Rhythmically, the upper line is exactly the same, and the harmonies tend to be in the forms of fourths and thirds, given we do have that better than you line at the end of this phrase.
Talk to myself for hours, yeah, say things you don't understand.
In the next phrase, we don't have those backup vocals for the first half of this, but in the back half, we have Miley doing harmonies with herself over an octave higher than her original line.
I can take myself dancing, yeah, I can hold my own hand.
At the end of the third chorus, we do have a slight extension as she does repeat the I can love me better than. Notice now it does not end on that B. In the second time, it now ends on a D.
Yeah, I can love me better than, yeah, I can love me better than.
Post-chorus.
The post-chorus, oddly enough, has chorus-style vocals in it, doing entirely eighth notes, starting off on that E, going up to F, going down to D, staying on there for a while before going back up to E, and then it has that lovely G-C at the end.
Can love me better, honey.
In the second post-chorus, we actually have an additional line, Miley without the chorus vocal effect, underneath all of this, mostly just hitting that low A. The big thing here is that the second post-chorus is actually twice as long. It has a whole additional phrase. You'll notice it tapers off at the end, though, and we now have Miley just doing melismas at the end, and the chorus vocals drop out. In the third post-chorus that ultimately ends the song, again, we just have the chorus vocals doing what they were doing before, but we have these lovely ad-libs over all of it from Miley. As the chorus vocals continue, Miley keeps doing ad-libs until we actually just end the song entirely.
Bridge.
The bridge, melodically and rhythmically, is exactly what Miley did in the pre-chorus, given the first half of the lyrics are from the first pre-chorus, and the second half of the lyrics are from the second pre-chorus.
I didn't wanna leave you, I didn't wanna fight. Started to cry, but then remembered
Out of all the artists we've looked at, I believe Miley Cyrus has changed the most throughout her career in terms of sound. Again, she started off as a Disney Channel star, so her music was that super family-friendly pop music. Once her Disney contract had ended, she did just become that typical pop music, before going into that one that we all know in the early 2010s, that R&B and hip-hop influenced craziness that was the Bangers era. She then calmed down, had a little bit of country influence, maybe from her father, maybe even a bit of rock influence, especially considering she released a rock album that did pretty well, if you remember that episode of Record Rundown, and now here we have her doing this pseudo-disco funk rock song. Despite all of her sonic changes, though, I do think she is going to remain a pop icon, and she will always be
remembered. I can buy myself flowers, write my name in the sand.
There's been a lot of talk about how this song can sound similar to Bruno Mars's When I Was Your Man. I've listened to both, and I do hear what they're talking about. I don't think it quite counts as an interpolation, though, and I don't think any sort of court case is going to come about for it. But hey, listen to both and let me know what you think.
Talking myself for hours.